Okay. Feel free to start, guys.
The Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group thanks you for welcoming us into your home for tonight's Zoom presentation titled From the Pacific Northwest to the Upper West Side. For 23 years, our group has shared our love for local history. To learn this history is to walk through the Bloomingdale neighborhood and to be surrounded by stories. Some of these stories we have shared through our workshops, hundreds of tours, and over 100 in-person presentations at the Bloomingdale Library and the International Youth Hostel. We also share these stories on our website, upperwestsidehistory.org. The website offers many tools that you can use to discover stories for yourself through the primary sources that are available in our local library collection and on the internet. During the pandemic, we switched our presentations to Zoom. And tonight, we know you will enjoy our 30th Zoom event. We thank the Columbus Amsterdam Business Improvement District for their longtime support and their invaluable technical expertise in making this switch. Our speaker tonight will offer us a fascinating new way to tell the story of our neighborhood. It will be a special treat, and you have the best seat in the house. Marjorie Cohen of our group's planning committee will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thanks, John, and welcome everybody. About 15 years ago, I read an article in the New Yorker, and it was called Mystery on Pearl Street. And it told the story of how one man fought to preserve an 1835 warehouse at 211 Pearl Street. And I guess it comes as no surprise to know that that man was Alan Solomon, tonight's guest. The story stuck with me. And when I heard that he had written a book, called Reclaimed Wood, a Field Guide, I got the book and I really, really loved it. The photos are beautiful. The research is extraordinary. The breadth of knowledge that he has of lumber and everything lumber is extraordinary, really. And I saw that after I read the book, I saw that Alan was making a presentation at the National Arts Council. And I went, John went, and it was really terrific. And so I asked him then if he would be willing to put a presentation together for our history group. And he said, sure. Now that was in February of 2020. So we scheduled it for something like the end of March in 2020. Well, I don't have to tell you what happened then. So that was it. But happily, he was nice enough to say, now that we've started Zooming and things have gotten better, that he would still willing to do the talk for us. So let me just give you a little bit of background on Alan. He's a partner in Sawkill Lumber, which is in Crown Heights. And what I put in my draft is he's joining us from his workshop showroom, but he isn't, because he went to Massachusetts today to check out some lumber in an old toy building where they made toys, in a town where they made toys. And there was a winter storm and he got kind of stuck. So he's been kind enough to park himself in a hotel along the way and to do the presentation. So we really appreciate it. But as a consolation prize, since we can't see
Okay. Okay, is it visible here?
Not yet.
Not the screenshot.
Yeah, try again.
1 second. I'm playing my screen. Is there something I need to press that I'm not pressing?
Go back to the Zoom and then.
Oh,
try to
share
click-
screen maybe?
Yeah,
Okay.
there we go.
Okay. Is
You see it?
that good?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, thank you, Marjorie, and thank you, John and Michael as well, for helping to organize this. Privileged to be here and to be presenting some of this material to such an active historical group in New York City. I guess the material I put together tonight in 3 parts. The first part is sort of an overview of the woods that built New York City through different eras. Short overview of that. You know, that's largely hidden inside the walls and ceilings of a lot of buildings from the 1800s to the early 1900s. And then we'll kind of chronicle the journey of a single tree from, I guess you could say, the Upper West Side of the United States, the Pacific Northwest, to the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the 1950s or early 60s. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about the limits and possibilities of reclaimed wood in the future. There's a whole lot of demolition that goes on in New York City every day. As you know, I don't have to tell you. You go down any block almost, and you can almost see, plywood fencing and demolition crews, going at it. Every day. This wood is from a building on Lower Broadway in Manhattan from the 1860s. And, it's just, New York's a fascinating place to reclaim lumber. It just seems like any building you crack open has, a little interesting piece of city history, or at least, something about the growth and development of an individual neighborhood. And, we even see that tonight in this one building from the Upper West Side where we salvaged some wood back in 2017. This is broadly the types of trees that built structures in New York City. On the left is oak, and there's not much oak left, but the oak is so common in flooring and in the structures of New York. I just had to kind of include it. But most of the wood we salvage are these 4 other trees. White pine, longleaf pine from the Deep South, Douglas fir from the Pacific Northwest, and spruce along with hemlock and some other smaller trees that, could come from the Pacific, could come from the Northeast or Southern Canada or down into Pennsylvania. New York City was just, as you can imagine, consuming, massive amounts of wood by the acre over the various eras. This just spotlights some of the areas of the country where wood came through. As I mentioned, early on, up until the mid 1850s, there was this rage for white pine from upstate New York, from New England. they were just sort of cherry picking these white pine trees. And the wood was, revered. It was an important part of the culture as well. 1 block north of Wall Street in Lower Manhattan is Pine Street. And, that sort of shows, how regarded the tree was. And perhaps even Wall Street is Pine Street, because they probably built the wall out of pine too. But the following the 1850s or the Civil War, they went down south and got longleaf pine from the south. Those forests opened up. The northern logging companies went down there. Land was cheap, and the wood proved to be an ideal type of material for the Industrial Revolution. It was hard, it was strong, it was fire resistant, grew to enormous sizes. It was critical in building the Brooklyn Bridge, in the sewers and subways of Manhattan, all the warehouses. A while back, I didn't get the wood, but there were some stables on the Upper West Side that had longleaf pine. I'm sure there's still some up there. At about the same time, there was this mass of immigration into New York and American cities, and that forced the need for a lot of timber. So they went back to the Northeast forest, and the white pine trees, a lot of trees that they overlooked in search of the white pine were now, perfectly good timber for, the row houses, the tenements, the enormous growth of the city. That mostly included red spruce, but also had woods like hemlock and balsam fir. They also jumped over the lake states, and they got a lot of wood from Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, that area, especially just after the white pine forest, were depleted in the Northeast. Then as you get into the early to mid 20th century, a lot of these forests are being depleted, but the rail lines are improving out to the Pacific Northwest, and those trees started to get, those forests started to open up, and wood from that area continued to flow into the city, building a lot of smaller warehouses, especially out in the outer boroughs, but also it appears this building on the Upper West Side at 466 Columbus Ave. This is a general overview, very rough idea of what percentage of woods of these species are in the city. Most of it is spruce and other softwoods in row houses, tenements, brownstones, smaller apartment houses. You tend to see longleaf pine, Douglas fir, white pine. But what they all have in common is that they're all what they call old growth. Sometimes they call virgin growth, but and there's not really a specific definition of these terms, but they're essentially trees that grew for hundreds of years before the first European settlers came, and were growing naturally in these old forests, and so they were large. They grew slowly. And they were, exceptional lumber. This gives a sense of, at the left, you see the coverage of these old growth forests across the country. The country was, had an incredible variety and volume of old forests. And on the right, we see, what is left of those specific old forests. A lot of them are protected, or they're sort of under siege or so forth. But, as you can see, there's quite a bit of logging that's gone on over just the course of about 100 years. So now we get into this one tree, the Douglas fir, that appears to be, was the type of wood that was found in this building in the Upper West Side at 466 Columbus Ave, that was torn down in 2017. And, one thing I enjoy about this is that there's always these new areas of history or a quality of the wood that, that's interesting to explore. And, I'd never really studied much about the logging history and the natural history of the Pacific Northwest. And, this presentation has given me some opportunity to, to start to look at that more closely. I've read some, but, everything's kind of a vast subject once you start to get into it. This is where the extent of the forests, most of, I think, the trees that were logged were coming from the more coastal region of the Northwest, but this is generally the range of these large Douglas fir trees. This is just a little first step in its growth. We're saying based on the average age of the tree and how long it lived, I'm saying the tree started to grow in the mid 1700s. It could have been the late 1600s, but the Douglas firs do grow for quite a long time. This is sort of a mature Doug fir, probably after a couple of hundred years, by 1890. A very rich forest life. Sometimes, it's always interesting. You look at lumber and it's so cut off from everything, that it grew within the animal life and the ecosystems of these forests. A real marvel, diverse and inexhaustible. It's an interesting kind of mirror to New York City itself. This is some logging where they're cutting the trees and they're being sort of ferried down the river to the sawmill. And even, in the early 1900s, these trees were enormous. As you can see, I'm not sure how this guy is managing this load, but somehow it's getting to its destination, or sometimes it didn't. There were a lot of logs that sunk in the river, and there's even this term for it now called sinker logs, where people go in and they pull logs up from the bottom of rivers and they use the wood there. This is maybe a style of truck that may have also brought logs to the mill. The various methods. So this one truck is, I guess, you could say Upper West Side or bust on it, and I'm sure a couple of them busted. Here's a kind of sawmill in the Pacific Northwest that may have cut the logs up. This is the R.W. Tower sawmill in Oregon, Keno, Oregon. This is the wood that, when it's fresh, as it may have somewhat looked when it's coming off the saw, maybe how it looked when it came to the building as well. It's got, this nice soft amber tone to it. It's moderately not hard or soft for soft wood. And sometimes it can have these very, psychedelic figure to it. You get a little taste of that here, but it can get pretty wild in Douglas fir. So here the wood gets to 466 Columbus Ave in Manhattan. This is, one of the tax photo images that I'm sure many people have seen from it. By this time, in the early 1940s, it looks like there was a billiards hall at the address and something going on the upper floors, but those look closed off. And by the 1950s, there was a grocer out in Queens named Saul Chalik. And apparently at this time, the grocers, the small grocers were getting really squeezed in price by these larger supermarket chains that were opening up. And Saul had the notion or the need to survive, an idea that, you know, he had to create you know, some buying power through, you know, creating an association of supermarkets. And that eventually evolved into the Associated Supermarket chain in the 1950s, which I think, you know, still exists today. But at the time, you know, his initiative worked, and he was able to, you know, pull together a number of grocers to create greater buying power and set up these associated supermarkets. And those grew from the Queens address, and eventually this location on the Upper West Side was opened apparently in the 1960s, I think. And that coincides with the type of lumber, because you know, based on the type of lumber that we found in the building, whether it's an addition over an existing building, you know, Douglas fir was the common type of lumber that they would be using in kind of a small commercial building or a mixed use building at the time. Sometimes it's interesting to look back at even the earlier history of a site. And, you know, as you all know, you know, you may have read this wonderful book, Mannahatta, that, you know, looks at the early environment of Manhattan, pre-European settlement. So the Upper West Side was also largely probably trees. But prior to the 1940s, there was a church at the site, and that apparently agreed to move, and then that was dismantled. Most likely the lumber from the church was reused, because reuse of lumber has been active throughout New York City's history. You can find old ads that are advertising for dismantling and saving lumber, saving all sorts of other fixtures and materials. But, you know, reclaimed lumber has been, you know, a staple of the building scene, you know, from the 1800s. It's just kind of in modern times that it's kind of taken this, you know, this different kind of turn. Here's the building, you know, just, I think, being readied for demolition on the Upper West Side. I think there was a little bit of a landmark push for this, but, you know, ultimately, you know, permits were issued. The process probably would have included, I'm often not there while they're actually taking it down. You know, we come when they're ready to get the beams picked up, but they typically cut one of the beams and then they lower it with a rope one by one. And, you know, it gets sent out the front and loaded onto usually one of these tractor trailers, and gets sent in the mill. This is the mill of my partner in Springfield, Mass. He's got a huge inventory of different types of lumber from all sorts of structures, barns, small apartment houses, industrial sites. This wood on the right, these long poles, are actually piers from the Hudson River. So there may be some kind of Upper West Side provenance there as well. Those were put in mid-centuries, similar to 466 Columbus. We haven't had much luck, you know, remilling these woods, but it's beautiful material. You know, every wood kind of has its features. This one, being in the Hudson River for 70 years, the wood, even the interior of the wood, picks up some interesting colors. whether, those colors are caused by something organic or toxic, it's hard to say, but it looks interesting. Here, the wood goes through quite a process, especially some of these old New York City buildings. They've got generations of nails typically in it. And you can see this guy's got a metal detector and he's going over the wood and he's literally chiseling out little pockets of wood to find these nails and pull them out with these special tools. They go into inventory, and then they get resawn and remilled. This is one interesting feature. This is just a little shot of some research that's going on at Columbia University. They do it's a field of study called dendrochronology. It's also known as tree ring science, but they use tree rings to chart the climate of different regions, and they're really interested in old wood from New York City because these trees, help them go back hundreds of years beyond what they're able to see in trees today. A 200-year-old tree today only goes back to, the mid 1800s, the early 1800s. An old tree that was cut down in the 1800s can go back to the 1500s. So this particular graph looks at the wood from 211 Pearl Street, and here they were able to extend their chronology because they have a big shared database with other dendrochronologists around the country back to the early 1500s, and this science can also be valuable in helping to determine whether these climate models show another signal of climate change. This is an end use of Douglas fir, where they put it into this beautiful apartment. Once the wood's remilled, it can have a really rich tone and dense figure, and signs of its prior life in the building, occasional nail holes and so forth. But it's very versatile. Here, the wood is left in its raw state, and they wanted to utilize it as this really aged texture to the wood. This is mostly aged wood where they did this kind of patchwork mix of woods that include the Coney Island Boardwalk and wood from a potato farm in Massachusetts and some tropical hardwoods that came off a ship from Japan, and I think wood vinegar tank, cypress. So they chose these really contrasting woods that kind of came together like this. A lot of this is just a house down in Tennessee, and this is just here because so much wood in New York City gets shipped out of the city, and one of the challenges is finding ways to keep more of this wood in New York City, for a number of reasons. It's a piece of the city's social and cultural history. It's environmental. It's a little piece of preservation. It's a beautiful thing to reincorporate into a new building and take it out of one New York City building and transform it into another one. And, a lot of architects and designers, have found, as you've seen from these previous pictures, beautiful, wonderful ways to reuse these woods in new projects and make them part of, New York today and its future. A little tiny piece of reclamation of these woodworking classes we just started doing last week, actually, or the week before, and The most popular class has been this cutting board class, where people build a cutting board, or I forget how they pronounce it, charcuterie board, and out of various types of wood. And it's a one-day class, and they learn some woodworking. But there's some other types of classes. But that's it's been a nice experience to kind of see the woods come full circle in these small little projects. Here's a close-up of one board that was made. This one was made by the mill, actually, but it's kind of representative of the wood. Here's some of the Coney Island boardwalk that was reclaimed. I forget the year. I think it was about 8 years ago. And then there was a bunch of wood taken out after Hurricane Sandy. But a lot of the Coney Island boardwalk went to this expo in Milan for the World's Fair as part of the American exhibition. So that was a really beautiful, wonderful installation. But again, another example of wood sort of finding a home and a demand outside of New York. Here's kind of a very, I guess you'd say, a New York Minute version of reclamation that was done by Sandra Beltrow, who's an Upper West Side resident. She did it a while back. So I'll leave it to that.
Alan, can you when you share a screen, can you make sure you also share sound? That's supposed to have a sound on it.
Oh, yeah. How do I turn on the sound for this?
Try sharing screen again. And then on the bottom left, it should say share sound.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to.
Here, hold on. Let me help a little bit.
Oh, share sound. Okay, got it. Okay.
And then click again the same. There you go.
Share your, okay. Let's see.
Okay, try playing it again.
Is that good?
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, thanks for Sandra Beltrow for putting that together. This doesn't have an image, but I guess this is where I'll wrap up and just say a little bit about one of the things that I think is of there's a lot of ways to value reclaimed wood, but in meeting people over time that use the wood, and hearing their comments, you start to realize that the material kind of sparks the imagination a little in different ways. And I guess in the same way that, other historical objects, architecture, and so forth, spark our imagination about the past and maybe even help us learn a little bit about ourselves. But reclaimed wood especially is interesting as well, because the wood is sort of salvaged from a location and it goes through this transformation into a new use. And I think it provides a little bit of a license for us to, transform the history of the wood ourselves. There's sort of enough that we know about the history, but there's so much that's kind of lost to history. in it. And it's, there's something about having the actual material that, that can, it seems, really help the imagination focus a little bit more on, on what it, what may have been experienced at this place, over time. And even just this one location on the Upper West Side, on Columbus Ave, even since the 1960s, when this, at least part of the building was built. Our company is Sawkill, which I guess I also found on the Upper West Side because I was looking at the map at the New York Historical Society, the library up there, and I noticed this creek that ran through the center of Manhattan at the time. It was the East and West 70s, called the Sawkill. That is Dutch for Sawmill Creek, and that was the first sawmill that the Dutch set up to start to harvest, this amazing timber. I mean, there was a lot of comments by the Dutch at the time on, these wondrous and goodly trees, and they were sort of blown away by the forest in the city, but they also had the Dutch also had the sawmill technology to start to exploit those forests, and I guess exploit the people that milled it too, because there was the map also included the slave quarters right next to the mill. So that's a, I guess, that's just part of the history, but the Sawkill kind of, pays some homage to, to this early practice of salvaging old lumber from the city and utilizing it, and hopefully, transforming it in a productive way. So I think that's about it. Can you hear me there?
Yep. All right. Thank you, Alan. Let's see. Now we can go into the Q&A questions. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. Or if you want to ask your question out loud, then make sure to raise your hand, and then we'll be able to let you speak and ask your questions. But I'll start with the Q&As. Irene Rice wanted to know if there was an elevated rail on Columbus Avenue from the picture that you took from the Associated, the tax photo, I believe. Which I think, Marjorie, can you answer that one? I believe it's the 9th Avenue L, but I could be wrong.
In the photo?
Yeah, the one that's on the 466 Columbus Avenue.
I would imagine, yeah. Is Jim here?
Oh, Jim is here. Give me a second. Oh, Gilbert actually would like to talk.
Hi there, Jim Mackin here. The 9th Avenue L came down in 1940. And I think that picture is also 1940. That was one of the tax photo pictures, I think. I could be wrong.
Right, it looked like a tax photo picture.
Might have missed it by a few months or maybe a year.
Got it. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Actually, from Jim. While you were claiming wood, did you notice any Native American chestnut found in your repertoire?
Native American
chestnut.
Chestnut. There is we do get chestnut, but it mostly comes from barns outside the city. typically when they were building the barn, they'd use trees that were, local. And they were, there's a fair amount of chestnut that comes out of barns.
Got it. Someone wanted to know if any of the wood that you reclaim has been used in historical preservation.
Yeah, good question. There were projects that other companies that work on around the country where they're, doing historical renovation
Mhm.
Of places. That they use the hard pine typically for, and maybe other types of wood in other areas. I'm not that familiar with other areas, but in New York City, it's pretty we get a lot of calls from people that are, need to replace a little patch of floor or, an area near a radiator or some other place, and they want to put in wood from the same era. I don't know if how that counts as preservation, but those are the type of projects I see that I think the South Street Seaport did some restoration, and even up at this place in Massachusetts, one of the groups interested in the wood is building rebuilding one of the hello?
Mastic Seaport?
Yeah, they're building one of the Tea Party ships. They want to use the wood. So there's a lot of kind of preservation projects where they're, or there's some people that just have a old home, like a brownstone, and they want wood that feels like it's in harmony with the era that it came from. Maybe they're even replacing an oak floor that was put in the 1920s, but they're restoring it, and they're considering or have put in, a wood that would have been harvested in the late 1800s, or was common, in those types of houses. A lot of row houses had these hard pine floors that were cut into these 3-inch or 2.5-inch slats that they want to, recreate. The Armory on the east side used hard pine for their floor. So there's a number of preservation projects.
Gil, do you want to ask your question out loud? Since you're here?
Yeah, okay. Can I be heard?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. The tradition of the 25-foot wide building lot in Manhattan seems to go back to the colonial period. And I've heard that this 25-foot standard was based on the available lengths of timber or the maximum widths that could be spanned by the available timber. Can you shed any light on this?
Well, I think you just did, in that that's something that I completely overlooked in mentioning, but I haven't seen anything read anything historically on that. I'm sure it exists somewhere, but it makes perfect sense. It's hard to imagine that wasn't a key factor in the lot size, and that some of them go down to 22. The row houses by the late 1800s. A lot of joists are like 22 feet. So it may have even been reduced a little to accommodate the most common lumber size, or else I think that's hugely important. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do you know what lumber was used for supporting the timbers for the floors in the cast iron facade buildings in Soho?
Soho, we just salvaged lumber from Soho. Soho has a lot of pine from the south, from the deep south. They were putting those were commercial buildings, and they were putting a lot of these heavy pine timbers in there. I think the cast iron is cast iron. You know that I don't think there's. But the interior of the building is all was all framed with hard pine. Some of them are 14 inches deep. The beams, a lot of like New York City tenements, they're 3 inches wide by 8 to 10 inches deep in dimension by 20 to 24 feet long. But as you get into these commercial buildings, they get bigger. And at 466 Columbus, the beams were 12 inches wide. So, when they have something that needs a little bit more capacity, the beams are a little bigger. Doug fir has, very, very good structural qualities. The trees were big. So, they can get those larger sizes. Today, it's very hard to get trees with those sizes. That's why they've gone into making these laminated timbers that glue up smaller pieces of wood. And there's an engineer from the UK that's in the city now, and he's part of a group that's trying to find a way to reuse lumber for these laminated timbers. That's some people may have heard of these timber frame buildings in New York City that they're trying to build even higher skyscrapers out of. It's a much more sustainable way to construct, but we'll see if it's possible to reuse these lumber for that, but it's hard to say.
Somebody had a question about a book that you shared throughout the talk, probably called Manhattan or something along those lines.
The book Mannahatta.
Mannahatta. Okay. How do you spell that so I can type it in?
I think the author's Eric Sanderson, Mannahatta.
Okay.
Mannahatta. It's a big, thick book, and amazing images and amazing research.
Thank you. All right. Next question we have here is someone wanted to mention they live in a building on 90th near Broadway. The building is about 100 years old. Their oak floors are original, so this wood would be used for flooring. So would this wood used for flooring have been aged before it used in commercial uses? And if so, how would the trees have been? Do you think it was cut into usable flooring, or before it was cut into usable flooring?
The oak or the oak flooring?
Yeah, the oak flooring.
Well, usually, like underneath this flooring is usually they have a subfloor, and the subfloor is wood that is sometimes we can reclaim a little bit of it, and that's typically like softer woods from the Northeast, and then that they may have gotten from southern Canada or Maine in the early 1900s, from what we can gather. The oak, I'm not sure. Most of the oak, comes from the mid-Atlantic states, like Pennsylvania and south to Tennessee and South Carolina, and maybe some of it came from, upstate New York. But, a lot of oak kinds that comes from came from, I think, the mid-Atlantic. And I'm not sure, if those were old growth trees or the the other name they call is second growth trees, which were trees that still grew pretty old, but they grew after the old growth trees were cut down. It could have been a mix of woods of different ages and so forth. I know a lot less about oak and how it was harvested over time. There seems to be a lot more information about softwoods because they were such large industries, and it was a different type of industry that would process softwoods than hardwoods like oak. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's
Got it. I guess that's it for the Q&As. Personal question that I have is, with your research, or the research that you guys had at Columbia, what was the most interesting find that you guys found?
They are it's a really slow process. We're still looking for grant funding to do more, and there's only been, I think, 3 buildings. We have samples now from like 30, 35 buildings, but they've only analyzed like 3 buildings. But the first building they analyzed was a building down on in Chelsea on the west side called the Terminal Warehouse. And it's a massive warehouse. I think back in the 70s, it was Studio 4, maybe not, there was the tunnel.
Yeah. Mhm.
And big building. They had exhibitions. They're turning that into new space now. And so the Columbia team went in there and they got samples of that. And they the building was constructed in 1892, so they were able to confirm the construction date of the building from 1892 because these wood samples told them that the trees were cut down in like 1890, 1891, something like that. And they were able to identify within, I think, like 100 miles, where the trees were harvested on a small border region in central Alabama and Georgia, at the border of Alabama and Georgia. And then from there, we were able to do some research and into the type of sawmills that were operating there during that era. And it appears as though we were able to identify the sawmill that supplied the wood to this specific building. And that was an interesting story of a sawmill that existed in central Pennsylvania that was already doing a lot of business in New York City, sending their lumber by rail into the city. The son of that business ventured out to Georgia. He bought land and bought a business and, began harvesting these timbers just as they were, there were these advances in railroad technology that allowed them to access, certain mountainous areas that they hadn't previously been able to access. And all of that just came out of looking at studying the growth rings of these trees, that became this kind of blueprint or DNA of the wood's history. So, that was one building, and the other buildings were interesting too. But yeah, it's really interesting to see this kind of back and forth between, the lab science and the history, creating even like more specific history and images, associated with this old wood.
Yeah, no, I hope you get more research. It sounds like you're doing pretty cool stuff with that. Someone wanted to know if your research also included questioning the denuding of the forest, I guess, like deforestation.
Yeah. I guess 2 things. Yes, alongside, the the value of the wood and the growth of development of the cities was, this disastrous clear cutting of the country's old growth forest. And then, at a certain point, it just really, sparked a movement for preservation in the early 20th century. The kind of, alongside, preserving, these national parks and so forth, but the whole science of silviculture, which is, how to grow trees, the beginnings of how to grow forests sustainably and so forth, was taking root. But, it's sort of like you're paying homage to the heritage at the same time you're, I guess, just trying to, look again at the so-called, sins of our fathers and the devastation of the forest. So Emily Dickinson had a great quote about maybe it was part of a, where have all the fir trees gone? Is anyone listening? Or I forget what she says, but there were people taking note of it and raising an alarm, but it was a machine that was plowing down the forest that wasn't really letting up until the early 20th century. Right now, like reclaim wood is great to do environmentally, but it doesn't really do much. It doesn't create much of an impact. If you were to reclaim every stick of lumber that's coming out of the building and reuse it, that reused wood doesn't really even register on a pie chart of how much lumber is used annually in the world. So but that's why I feel like it has value in so many other ways, and historically and culturally and so forth. But environmentally, it's helpful, but in a real sense, it's not really doing a lot.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we have one more question on Q&A, then we go to Jim Mackin, then Marjorie, then Peter. So have you encountered any black locust poles?
Yeah, close at the mills, a lot of black locust, and it's become very popular in the past few years, because it's a much better substitute. It's a great substitute for tropical hardwoods. I showed the Coney Island Boardwalk was made of tropical hardwoods from, Brazil, Ecuador. I think they were pulled out of, jungles with elephants back in the 1950s or 60s still. But reusing or using tropical hardwoods today is really, it's very destructive to the rainforest. And so black locust has become much more popular, but it's a hard tree to really to grow in large volume. It's going to be hard for black locust to really fulfill the needs of people's desire to use wood for exterior applications. So even though Coney Island Boardwalk was looking at recycled plastic, and I think they settled on concrete and so forth. So like every option and direction has like its trade-offs, but the certainty is that they want to stop using tropical hardwoods and replace it with stuff like black locust.
Got it. All right, Jim, do you have a question that you want to ask?
Yeah, generally, and again, I can't say enough good things about your book, Alan. It's one of my all-time favorites, and I have a great interest in trees and wood generally. But my question is this: can you tell us a little bit about the market now with reclaimed wood? If you were an artist and you wanted to get some reclaimed wood of a certain type, species, or whatever, or you wanted to do repair work, or you had an architect that was going to do something creative, and you just like the look, texture, feel of old wood, how would you go about getting it? And could you tell us a little bit about what it costs relative to new lumber, let's say?
Yeah, I guess most parts of the country now have, someone who's working with reclaimed wood, especially in the urban areas, and then the number of outlying areas. So, I guess you start with like an internet search, Googling around and exploring, options that way. One of the challenges in acquiring reclaimed wood is that, the lots are so varied, almost every building can have, a little different texture or tone to the wood, levels of distress and so forth. So, it's really challenging to give someone a sense of what, let's say a wall would look like or a floor would look like from a small, little 8 or 12-inch piece of the wood. So images help, and a sample to get a sense of the texture and color of it, and seeing larger panels of the wood. Everything kind of contributes to trying to get a sense of, what it's going to look like when you get it. Price-wise, and a lot of it is as opposed to seeing it on the computer and just ordering it, it kind of involves a conversation with someone at the mill, and I don't know how else to say it. You just kind of have to use your judgment on whether, you're going to get what you think you're going to get. But because the price, it's an investment. Most reclaimed wood, runs, 2 or 3 times the cost of new lumber. And, that's part of the reason I feel, compelled to try to get a specific history to the wood and try to talk about the backstory of the wood, because it feels like it's a way of helping to realize the value of the material. And, part of that value comes from the person who's living with the wood. If it has value to them and it's part of their home and it's part of their, experience in living with the home, it can really be, oftentimes a floor or even a paneling is just a backdrop, to the design of a space. But oftentimes it's, with reclaimed wood, it becomes more of like a defining part of the space. And that's part of the reason why some architects don't like reclaimed wood. Some of the architects, have told me that they, I won't use any swear words here, but, they really don't like reclaimed wood in certain ways. And the new Columbia project at the Manhattanville campus, up on, I think it's 125th Street. This is just, I guess, one example, because that was designed by Renzo Piano's studio, and they struggled with it because we salvaged a lot of wood from that project, and we tried to get it back into the project, but they thought the wood was too graphic. Like that was the word they used to describe, this hard pine, because it has, somewhat of a presence, with its figure and grain. But, so for various reasons, I can't speak for all of the reasons or say whether it's a good decision, a bad decision, but they didn't use the wood. Renzo did use the wood. Renzo Piano did use the wood at the Whitney Museum. If you've been to the Whitney, that's an amazing installation of hard pine on the floor. But they also, they like pickled the wood with this lighter tone. So they even wanted to kind of, try to knock down what they felt was a little bit too much of a graphic quality to the wood. Which may have been a good decision with, an art space like that, where you're trying to feature the art. But that's one little corner of some of the challenges of trying to reuse the wood. So there were tons of wood salvaged from the Manhattanville campus, but the only wood that was reused, if you go there, I'm pretty sure it's still there. There are some benches in the courtyard to the building that were made of hard pine. So, so that it's even beautiful old growth wood. It can be really challenging, when there are certain design visions and performance needs of a modern building, to get it in. Where a lot of hard pine does go is down south, where there's this huge reverence for Southern pine, and there are, huge expensive homes, that are filled with Southern pine floors and walls, stairs, moldings, cabinetry, beams. There's enough hard pine, it seems, to go in there, that could fill, 50 coffee shops, in New York City, or other projects. So that's kind of where it stands.
Thank you.
All right, Marjorie, and then Peter.
Well, I had mentioned before that we had an idea about sort of a consolation prize, since we couldn't see Alan's workshop. And so if anyone is interested, we thought maybe we could get a group of Upper West Siders or from the audience and go to Alan's workshop, to one of those, build the cutting board, because they look beautiful. So if anyone is interested, if you could let us know. John, would it be best to let us know through the website?
Yeah, on the contact page.
Okay. So if you're interested, let us know, and we can try to figure out a date. And Alan's been nice enough to offer that as a possibility. Thanks. And let me just get in a thank you to Alan too, because it was a really interesting talk.
Thank you, Alan.
And
Yes.
really appreciate your putting a program together specifically for us. I know that's a lot of work, and we really appreciate it. It was excellent.
Yeah, thanks so much for your interest. And it's
Sure.
really great to present it to people that all have a real regard for history and, keen interest in,
Yeah,
local history.
that we've got. Did Michael, does Gil have a question?
I'm not sure. Gil, do you have a question?
I see his hand up saying
It might have been from
My
earlier.
hand? No, that wasn't me.
leftover hand.
It was from earlier, I believe. Okay.
Ah, okay.
Peter, I think, has the last question.
I wanted to just say thank you so much, Alan. This has been really great. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. I really appreciated the chart that showed the different woods and when they came into the when they became available. I live in a building that was built around 1895, and the floors and the beams, I was told, were yellow pine, which I assume is the longleaf pine. I'm not sure, but it's
Yep.
that would be my guess. And I was curious, would those have been milled down south and then sent up separately, or would they have all come up here? And would there have been a milling procedure up here? The beams are the 3 to 4 inch. They may have started as 4 inch and they've shrunk to 3 inch over the past 120 years. But I'm just curious, they're rough cut, whereas the floors are, even though they're underlayment floors, they're obviously finished. So I was just curious whether they would have been done down there or up here.
They milled it down south. It was cheaper, and then transportation wise, they sent it up as lumber.
Okay.
And they sent it all over the world from the south, even Europe and England. There was a demand for it. There's a royal castle that has pine floors in it, and use it in Germany for window frames. Had good exterior ships, but yeah, it would have been milled in down south.
Well, thank you very much. And like I said, just lots of good information, and particularly enjoyed that graph that showed the location of and the timing for the availability of woods. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right. You already have interest on 2 people who wanted to join you on the tour, just to let you know.
To make a workshop, it's not just a tour, you gotta do some work.
Oh, great. Yeah. Okay. Make sure to fill out the contact us page on the upperwestsidehistory.org, and we'll make sure to include you. But
That's
I
good.
think that's it for tonight, right?
Hey,
All right.
thank you, folks.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
Alan.
again. Yeah,
Thanks so much, Alan.
okay, thank you. Yeah, really enjoyed being there with you.
Great.